Ouija Board Seance Brings Poltergeist by Mrs. Skeletor. It all started a little after I turned 12. My cousin, sister, and I had a fascination with using the Ouija board. We had been using it for a short while, and every time we used it, the experience was a positive one. One night, some family friends came over, and I was telling my friend about how I used our Ouija board and how we were communicating with spirits and psychics. She was skeptical about it, so I went on a mission to prove what me, my sister, and cousin had seen. We went to my bedroom and proceeded to do a seance, and we made contact with the spirit on the first attempt, and it was an angry one. It kept spelling out vulgar remarks and repeating that it was going to kill us. We were both getting really creeped out, so she went and got her cousin, who, after a few minutes of panicked rambling, brought him into my room. We still had contact with the same entity as though we'd never stopped using the board. It kept repeating that it was going to kill us, and that we needed to leave the room. So Mr. Gangsta Cousin started to argue with the spirit and antagonize it. He eventually got frustrated with the situation, and we all left the room. That night, I remember ranting on about a ghost in my room to my mother, and she reassured me that it was an overactive imagination. A couple of months later, we started experiencing poltergeist activity in the house. Doors opening and closing on their own, lights turning on in the middle of the night, particularly the one in the dining room. This light switch is a turnstile knob, so it takes a little more effort to turn it on rather than just flipping the switch. The kitchen was a hotspot for activity. The cupboards and drawers would open on their own, and cups would fall out of the cabinets and break on the floor in the middle of the night on a frequent basis. And of course, there was my bedroom. Every night, I could hear a deep, heavy breathing, like a man slowly panting next to my bed. It would start quiet, get louder, and then stop completely. I would have to sleep buried under all of my blankets and pillows just to get to sleep. I would wake almost every morning with claw-like scratches on my body. Objects in the house would be repositioned or moved from their original spots to a different room, and we never saw this happen, but it was always confusing to walk into a room and think, how the hell did this get here? We also were seeing shadows. It would walk down the hallway past the bedrooms and through the kitchen. You'd catch it from the corner of your eye or feel a cold gust go by. On many occasions, I would be sitting on the couch in my living room doing my homework, and I would feel fingertips brush across my hand as I wrote. And this would follow with the walls creaking, starting from one end of the house all the way to the opposite end. I used to fear this being entirely, and later as the years went by, I learned that my fear only gave it energy to manifest the disturbances in the household. It seemed particularly angry at me, although members of the family experienced many of the same things as me. I am now nearly 23 and have not lived in my parents' house for a couple of years. My mom still reports to me that there is activity in the house, and when I'm there for family gatherings, I feel the negative energy when it's nearby. It's a similar feeling to if you were about to be attacked by a wild animal or something. It seems under control now, but it likes to steal silverware. I have had countless encounters with this entity, but I guess those experiences count for another story. My husband, sister-in-law, and I are planning an investigation soon. This is happening right now, by Too Crazy for Me. I've been trying to decide whether to post something about this and where. None of the home security subs really fit or have posts like this. I think I just need some objective feedback on how to deal with this. Using my throwaway account because I don't want people to know the layout of my house. So my partner and I just moved to a desert community in the American Southwest. I've always wanted to live down here, and so far I absolutely love it. I love the quiet, living on the outskirts of town with desert to the horizon in my backyard, how friendly people are, the stars at night, the wildlife, the space. I'm not bothered by the occasional snake or scorpion or coyote in my yard, but I've recently been getting the feeling that there have been other creatures in my yard as well. Even if I'm not imagining it, I don't know if this is worth doing something about, or what I can do. I'll explain. My partner got a lucrative job offer from a hospital here, where he covers the night shift for his specialty at most of the local hospitals in 3 states. Small hospitals in remote areas often offer nice incentives to bring people in from large cities, and since we were looking to move here anyway, we decided to take the position for a couple of years and see if I could find a job in my field here in the meantime. At the moment, I'm working remotely, and I stay on the night shift to be able to see my fiancée more. We get up around 2 or 3 p.m., he goes to work early enough for me to run around and do any shopping or chores in the afternoon, and he gets back from work around 5 a.m., and we head to bed around 7. It's an intense schedule, but he has every other week off. This is important later. So after 5 p.m., I'm home alone all day at the duplex that we rent from an elderly couple down the block. We used to have a medical resident living on the other side, but she would never talk to us, and she just moved out. Apparently she tore the place apart, so there are contractors working on the other side during the day most days. So I sit at the kitchen table and work during the night, occasionally going out to walk our old dog, get the mail, or to water the plants in the courtyard. The entire house is visible from the courtyard because there are windows and glass doors leading to basically every room from there. I'm going to detail the incidents as they've occurred, with minimal editorializing. 1. 4 weeks ago, I went back to sleep after my partner left for work. About an hour later at one point, I woke up and realized that my dog had been barking for an unusually long time and doing his danger bark. The lawn guys and delivery folks come into our courtyard and we just moved in, so I figure it's something like that. Still, he knows the delivery guys and neighbors by now, and they usually leave pretty quickly. He must have been barking for 2 or more minutes by now. I sat up in bed and looked out into the courtyard, and there's a man I don't recognize, and he's acting weird. He kind of looks like Willem Dafoe. He's near the front door trying to look into the windows around the side, looking into windows progressively further from the door. Without thinking, I called out, "I'll be right there," thinking that he needed a signature or something. The guy steps back quickly, turns around and speed walks out of the courtyard. As he does so, he gives me this extremely malevolent stare. I've never quite seen anything like it before. It startled me because he looked right at me, dead in the eye through the window, and just looked disgusted and hateful. But during the day, you can't see through the blinds from the outside. I've checked. How did he know where I was? I admit, this event freaked me out, and may have laid the groundwork for my impressions of the potentially perfectly normal events outlined below. I flash back to this moment regularly for some reason. 2. 3 weeks ago, strange stuff starts to happen. My partner offers to work some extra shifts on what would normally be his week off, so I'm often home alone. A few times I hear what I think must be one of my elderly neighbors around the side of the house, but when I go over there, there's no one there. I start to hear someone walking around the outside of the house at night. The area is surrounded by gravel, so unless someone steps slowly, you can hear things moving around. When I was laying in bed working on things a few times, I became acutely aware of noise just outside the bedroom window, late at night. I started checking the area with the flashlight when I went outside. I heard bipedal footsteps on the roof multiple times during the periods when the neighbors confirmed that no contractors were supposed to be up there, and it was often at night. The feeling of being watched a lot at night began, and I started leaving the outdoor lights on all night while I was there, especially in the courtyard. I don't take showers alone because I sometimes hear footsteps on the roof when I'm in there, and there's a skylight over the shower. I researched, bought, and installed a security system, and a couple of cameras in the courtyard. 3. 2 weeks ago. And this is when things get more serious. I pull into my parking space and see one of the elderly neighbors peering into my bedroom window in the afternoon. I greet him, and he says he's going around the side of the house to activate the sprinkler system that happens to have the hub on our property. Unclear if this is related. I put up opaque clings in the windows of the bedroom to block some of the light while we're sleeping during the day. As soon as I do, I stop feeling watched from the bedroom window, but begin to feel uncomfortable that my view of the courtyard is obscured. I do feel better for 2 days. The next night, I start feeling watched from the living room windows while I'm working, and eventually from the kitchen window especially. That night I have a small panic attack and spend a lot of time in bed under the covers with my dog in the room with me. I don't know the source of my discomfort and keep telling myself I'm being paranoid and chalk it up to reading some creepy stuff I read the week before. I have to cancel an event because I'm up all day unable to sleep due to extreme anxiety. I talk at length with my partner about getting more cameras, but we don't have the money, and I'm still in denial about the reasons for my discomfort, so I drop it. Stuff in the courtyard is sometimes moved around, and then I watch the camera to figure out the neighbor woman did it. Beer cans and some other stuff is found on the property that isn't ours, but I think it's the wind. Things related to our cars and garbage cans start being messed with, but you can see around for miles, and there aren't really many that people here. I hear tapping on a window and ignore it. 4. Last week. We were traveling for part of the week. When we got back, we were in good spirits. My partner went right back to work, and my nights became predictable. Feeling good and doing things until a few hours after it gets dark. I suddenly feel shitty, not wanting to do things that put me near the windows, deciding to curl up in bed with my dog in my room and refuse to move until my partner gets home. This has happened every night this past week. Finally, I noticed my dogs kept staring at the kitchen window with both ears facing towards it, ignoring commands or questions for long periods of time. My very curious cat repeatedly kept trying to see something outside of it as well during the night. This finally jogged me back to reality, and I realized that I feel this oppressive sensation of being watched every night starting around 10 p.m. and continuing until dawn. It's mostly from the kitchen window, but honestly, the whole house freaks me out now. There isn't really anywhere to run that doesn't have windows except the garage or the bathroom. I take my phone and a knife with me everywhere I go. I constantly check the courtyard because every room has a door leading to it. Tonight, I took my dog out and heard someone walking towards us from the side of the house. And I called out, shone the flashlight over there, but it stopped, and I saw nothing. Normally, I would have gone to investigate, but I had the strongest feeling that I shouldn't. The same thing happened in another location later in the evening. When I took the dog out yesterday around midnight, someone was coming across the field I take him to with a flashlight, and when they got near me, they shut the flashlight off and I didn't see them after that, and they didn't respond to my calling out. I'm a mid-30s female who is not easily spooked. I've worked in law enforcement and SAR, and I feel confident in my ability to defend myself. The landlady was very insistent that we not change the locks. She said that a cleaning person who stole some of their things had a key to the lower one, so to not use that one and just to use the deadbolt, for which supposedly only she and I have keys. I feel like I'm in a slow-motion horror movie, but during the day and partners' weeks off, everything is usually fine, so I don't know what to think. I don't know why I think that. My partner wants me to get my concealed carry and another younger dog. And this isn't known to be an unsafe area at all, but the properties are spaced pretty well. I can't tell whether any of this is real or not. I don't have any close friends here, and I'm planning to buy a camera and motion lights for the back when I have money next week. But, and I know this sounds crazy, I don't know if that's a good idea. I think, whoever it is, once I've seen them, they're going to escalate this. New Office by Kim B. My office has just over than doubled itself. It took over 2 years and a lot of renovation, remodeling, and construction, and now we're all trying to settle in and get comfortable. By doubling its size, new ground was broken, of course. The existing structure added to one forming a whole, and to my knowledge, the land added onto it at that time had homes on it. These homes have long since been taken down. I have an office in the older section of the building now, actually not far from where my previous office was. However, now instead of sharing an office, I have a private one. Yeah, a small promotion along with it, thank goodness. Over the last couple of weeks, settling into my new office has been very exciting, interesting, and frustrating. The business does not stop day to day to let you settle in. Over the last couple of days, very strange occurrences have been taking place in this portion of my building. Yesterday, I left a soda on my desk and went to a meeting, and when I returned, no one in this wing of the building was there at the time and my office was locked. The lid was replaced on the soda, and it had moved to another filing cabinet across the room. One morning I sat at my computer to catch up on some correspondence, and I felt 2 taps on my shoulder. I sit with my back to the wall, and the door is closed, and I am the only one in there. This has happened 7 times in the past 2 weeks, and generally a few minutes after the taps on my shoulder, I hear whispering. 2 to 3 different voices, at least one male, almost as if in conversation. One time I looked up across my office and noticed 2 of the ceiling tiles were moved. They were not that way when I came in that morning. One time I came in, unlocked my office, and about half of the tiles were stacked neatly in the middle of the floor. I hadn't been notified of any work being done in my office, so I was a bit confused. The tiles were not taken down from one section. They were removed randomly, almost every other one in the ceiling. About an hour after I arrived, the facilities manager came in, and he came into my office and said, "What are these doing down here?" I asked him the same question, and he said he had no idea. I had not left until late in the evening the night before, and he had not had any workman in the building. My office was definitely not having any work done, and he and I reviewed the security tapes. The tapes are dated and time-stamped, and I am a secure wing of the building. At about 2:48 a.m., you can see my office door open slightly, and then at 3:01, it slams closed. I mean, you can hear the slam on the tape. Other than that, absolutely nothing visible or audible the whole night. A workman was sent to my office to rehang the tiles, and he had a very difficult time with his task, because on each of the metal grid areas where a tile had been removed, the metal had been bent upward. I continued to be tapped on the shoulder, I would say at least 2 times a day. And when I opened the door to the office, there are the whispers as I stated before, at least one male sounding like about 15 or 20 other people whispering in conversation too. I have crosses in my office now, and I began to use a smoke crystal, and I have a Bible. I'm at a loss on this one. I did ask the facilities manager if there had been any strange happenings in any other parts of the building, and he said he couldn't talk about it now and kind of left my office in a hurry. He and I have been pretty close friends, so this is odd behavior. I called him on his personal line the other evening, seeing if he would talk to me outside of the office. His response was, "Let it go, Kim. I'm terrified and don't know what to do. If I can come to terms with this in my mind, we'll talk." He then hung up on me. Since the phone call, he has been avoiding me like the plague. For a couple of days, things were going okay. I was still hearing the whispering conversations as I opened the door, and I was still being tapped on the shoulder, but I chose to not respond any longer to these things. There is no way anyone in the office will let there be an investigation, even if promised the utmost anonymity. An investigation is not going to happen. Then one night was one for the record books of frightening for my life. I was packing up my briefcase to leave for the work with some extra stuff to take home. Yeah, I'm a workaholic. I was placing the documents I needed to work on, along with a few books for reference, and I heard a whispered male voice in my right ear away from the door. The whisperer said, "I want to come with you. I stopped loading my briefcase, goose flesh on my arms, and looked around. Nothing. I emphatically said, no one from my place of business ever joins me at home. It's a rule of mine. I finished loading up my briefcase with the needed items, and then I remembered I had brought a salad for lunch and went to the kitchen to retrieve my containers. As I have mentioned, I'm in a secure wing, so walking away from my office without securely locking the door is grounds for termination. I pulled the door closed and tried the handle. It was locked up tight. I went to the kitchen, grabbed my bowl and utensils, and went back to my office. I turned the key in the lock and noticed immediately that the lights had been turned off. Okay, maybe I could have flipped the switch without thinking about it, but I would know if I didn't or did pull the chain on the desk lamp. I turned on the lights and went to my briefcase, and all of the data, paperwork, and books I had just packed in there no more than 3 minutes prior were now stacked into 3 neat little piles on the floor. 2 piles were on the left side, 1 pile was on the right side. I went to my briefcase and looked down. Not only was it securely zipped, but it was also latched with its key lock. I don't use the key system unless traveling because of the hassle. I went to my purse and got the key and opened up the briefcase. As I opened it and unzipped it, there was a huge whoosh sound, almost like letting the air out of a giant balloon. I replaced all of the items in the briefcase and closed it back up, this time choosing to lock it. I continued to hear whispering conversations as before, and they're punctuated by a deeper male whisper saying, "Damn, we have to get out of here." I keep telling them to cross over, and as a matter of fact, I tried it so many times today, but the responses I got were nothing. Now I'm getting shh. What a mess. This drama continues, and it's making it harder to concentrate. Actually, I worked in the boardroom one day just so I could get some things done. Then, I had a minister come out to my office after hours and bless my office, hoping to rid myself of the entities that were intent on distracting me. It went rather well. No occurrences while he was present, and after he left, a feeling of peace for me that I had not experienced here since moving into my new office. Unfortunately, my friend the facilities manager continued to look for employment elsewhere because of all the other occurrences that he has had, and he refuses to even share most of them with me, saying he is looking for logical reasons. My office has calmed down, and I have had no experiences in the last 10 days. However, the rest of the buildings appear to still have something or someone plaguing them. Doors still open and close, and others have reported hearing voices. The security officer finds it fascinating. He likes to watch the doors on the security cameras. He has always checked each and every one to see if they're open or closed, assuring that the building is not being broken into. He wasn't so happy the other day, though, after becoming locked in the garage for almost 3 minutes. It was close to the end of the workday, and he was making his rounds. He waved to me as he walked by my office, and he carries a walkie-talkie as well as a cell phone. He'd been gone for about a half hour when the staff began noticing he hadn't returned from his rounds. We tried calling him on his walkie-talkie, and there was no response, just crackling noises. We tried his cell, and it went straight to voicemail. One of the maintenance workers and I decided to walk his rounds and find him. As we neared the garage at the end of what would have been his rounds, we heard knocking from the inside of the garage on the door. I used my master key and unlocked the garage door, and the security officer was in there, knocking to get out. We asked him what had happened and why he wasn't responding on the walkie-talkie and not answering his cell. He stated that his cell had never rang, and he removed it from his pocket and was fully operational with a full signal. I told him to check his voicemails, and sure enough, there were a couple of messages from the staff asking him where he was and if he was okay. He stated he could hear our voices coming through the speaker on his walkie-talkie and was responding to us, but I advised him that all we heard was static on our end. Apparently, as he walked by the garage on his rounds, he could hear movement and voices from inside the garage. There are no windows and only 2-sided deadbolts on both the overhead and side doors. Thinking perhaps it was someone from maintenance, he unlocked the walk-through door just to check on things. As he opened the door, he could still hear voices and movement, but it was dark in there and hard to see. He reached over and flipped on the light. As he turned on the light, the voices and movement stopped, and the door slammed behind him. He did a quick look around the garage, not hard to do as the building is mostly empty space when none of the vehicles are in there. He saw no one or anything out of order. He turned back to the door using his master key and tried to unlock the door. He indicated the key would move and sound as if the door was unlocking, but it wouldn't open. He repeated this process a couple of times and also tried to unlock the overhead door with the same results. He then tried reaching someone in the office by the same means we were trying to reach him, the cell phone and the walkie-talkie, and he indicated this went on for about 3 minutes until we arrived. As we exited the garage, we could hear laughter, like at a movie or a play. Many voices laughing together. And then it went away. We headed back across the small lot to the office, and he confided in me that this time made him uncomfortable. I do think that the activity has been removed from my actual office, but not the grounds or buildings. As long as this remains harmless, what else can be done? The officers of the business refuse to acknowledge the issue. But I can concentrate now and don't feel the fear and anxiety I did when it was in my office. Roadside Assistance, submitted by Can of Beans. Around 11 p.m. on a foggy night in 1994, in a still small central Texas town, I was driving my girlfriend home from our date on a well-traveled highway near her home. We were in high school, and not wanting to infuriate her father, we dutifully planned to be early for her curfew. About 1.5 miles from her home, as we crossed the hill and drove into the river valley that crisscrosses the county, we approached the overpass at the river. Our eyes were drawn toward the red lights across the bridge, which were certainly not anything we had seen before. Due to the dense fog, we could not decipher the source of these lights. I slowed the truck a bit and changed lanes to put space between us and the lights. I'll admit, my chest tightened as we drew closer to the unexplained lights. UFO? Fatal accident? Something sinister? None of these things we were caring to stumble upon on a creepy, foggy night, but for some reason, I expected it. I proceeded with extreme caution, and I did admit I was anxious. Our eyes were finally able to pierce the dense fog, and we realized we were looking at the taillights of a disabled truck in a bar ditch. Not like you may expect when someone careens from the road surface and is stuck in a ditch. No. This truck was perpendicular to the highway, and the headlights were in the bottom of the shallow ditch and still on, with the taillights solidly positioned 90 degrees in the air. Not one tire was touching the ground. Slowly, aloud, I said, "What the hell?" This wasn't a TV drama-style cliffhanger where the truck was teetering on the brink. Dude was frickin' stuck. We stopped beside the disabled truck to better gauge the situation, when my girlfriend noticed someone sitting on the culvert drainpipe near the truck. The stranded driver appeared to be a bit older than us, but it was difficult to be certain. His knees were pulled to his chest, and his head hung low in his folded arms as he shook his head without pause. Fearing the worst of the aforementioned uncertainties, I shouted to the driver, "Hey man, you okay? Is anyone still in the vehicle?" The guy raised his eyes from his arms for a brief moment, though not looking at us, and reassumed the position, never acknowledging our presence. I felt something was definitely amiss, so I hollered, "Don't worry, bud. We'll be back with a tow strap to pull you out." I promptly stabbed the gas, and he never looked up. As expected, my girlfriend spun around to look at me with a mixture of disgust and woman rage. She remarked with an appalled tone, "Where are we going? That guy needs help. You have a tow strap in the toolbox, right?" I had a tow strap. I also had a heavy and unshakable feeling that something wasn't right, though I couldn't define it. As I sped away with my foot on the gas and her chewing my ass, I made it to the turnaround about 1/3 of a mile up the road. I made the loop and peered in my rear view to confirm the scene had not changed. I paused behind a small grove of trees at the turnaround to tell my girlfriend, "Something's not right. I think we should call 911 for the guy and haul ass." She disagreed and suggested if I was uncomfortable, we could call her brother-in-law and he would be there in just a couple of minutes. That seemed fair enough, so I decided to make a pass on the divided highway to reassess the situation. We had been stopped for no more than 45 seconds when I turned back to drive past the stranded motorist. We cleared the small grove of trees to see the taillights were now out. "Well, where did he go?" my girlfriend asked, very puzzled. I glanced left to see the driver and truck were gone. Nowhere to be found. I was speechless. This highway is long, relatively straight, and even on a clear night, headlights in their glow can be seen for over a mile. In the fog, it's magnified skyward. In the brief time it took for us to turn around, someone who was in royally effed status in a ditch and completely distraught managed to collect his emotions and hulk a full-size Chevy Silverado back to roadworthy condition and slip away unnoticed. The nearest road is about 3/4 of a mile away, so unless he drove on oncoming lanes of traffic or through the closest barbed wire fence, repaired it, and then even through an endless hayfield, homeboy vanished into thin air. Looking for an answer of any sort, I turned to my girlfriend to see an expectantly perplexed look on her face. When our eyes met, she said sharply, "Drive." As she quickly squared up to face forward, I happily obliged and drove in the opposite direction of her home and back toward town. We drove for about 5 miles in silence until she asked with obvious concern without looking my way, "What did we just see?" I couldn't provide a solid answer. Somewhat out of the blue, the day after, and still clearly bothered by event, she would add, "Did you notice the traffic?" After dialing in on the nature of her random question, I told her I hadn't. She said, "We saw no other cars anywhere. It's a major highway. When have you ever been on that stretch of road and not seen another vehicle for over 10 minutes? I mean, even sheriff's deputies would have driven by every 10 minutes. I hadn't considered the notion, but she was indeed correct. No matter the weather or time or day of night, passenger vehicles and large trucks travel that road with a steady rhythm. There was no way 30 seconds would pass before a vehicle was seen. The next day was bright and clear, and I drove to the location where the truck had been, and I pulled over for an investigative look around. I parked about 400 yards away and walked over, taking notice of every detail. Or I would have if there had been any. There was nothing. No skid marks, no disturbed gravel, no tire tracks in the grass or even uprooted grass where the truck had been sitting on end merely hours before. It would be impossible to maneuver a 2-ton vehicle in that manner and leave no sign. Ultimately, I resigned to file it away in my mind as just one of those things. 24 years later, I still have no explanation for what we saw that night, or the lack of evidence that anything ever transpired. I'm not frightened by this occurrence in any way, just completely baffled. I'm interested in suggestions. Thanks for listening. Something in My House, submitted by Narayan. I'm a 38-year-old male, and I've lived in Columbus, Ohio since 2005. In 2013, I was 33, and I had just stumbled on a podcast which was mostly ghost stories that were sent in from around the world, much like your own show. I became sort of intrigued by just listening to talk radio because I found it relaxing at night, and it was sort of an adventure for me, I guess. So I first started listening just out of pure entertainment, and to be honest, I never really had a reason to believe or not believe in the paranormal, for never having experienced anything in person. I'm a fairly well-known tattoo artist and was working at a shop in Columbus during this time. I had just started working on a young man named Ryan. His mother, Kim, was there hanging out when he came in for his appointments, and she was really cool to talk to, so we'd always talk about all kinds of stuff when they came in. We somehow got to talking about my desperate search for a house to rent, and Kim happened to be a property manager for a house, which the owners had been trying to sell. At the time, my friend Nate and I were having terrible luck in our search for a house to rent and not an apartment. Kim said the owners may agree to rent it out since it was just sitting vacant, and I told her what our budget was, and she said I'll talk to the owners and see if they'll agree to that. I hadn't even seen the inside of the house yet, but we were in a desperate spot to move, and from the outside it looked good, and she mentioned all of the work that they were doing to it. And for the neighborhood and the size of the place, and what they agreed to accept for our rent, we were getting a steal. After they approved us for moving in, we were moving our stuff in the next day. We had some road bumps moving in, though. The place was vacant for a year, and they found and arrested some squatters the week we were supposed to move in. So the place was wrecked, and it looked like someone had just dumped a trash can all over the downstairs. So we waited a couple more days impatiently as they had a cleaning company come in and deep clean the entire house. This house is a 3,200 square foot Victorian home which was built in 1898. I'll give a brief description of the layout so you can sort of picture it. When you walked into a foyer with tile floors, straight ahead was a dining room. Beyond that was a kitchen, and to the right as soon as you walked in was an enormous living room which looked like it had been separated into 2 rooms at one point, and then opened up into one huge downstairs living area, with each side of the room having its own fireplace. I couldn't help but think about how much furniture it would take to try to fill this area. Either way, we were relieved to be in a house without having to worry about noisy neighbors above or beside us, hence the reason we didn't want an apartment. One thing I noticed right away was, if you don't know much about summers in the Midwest, Ohio especially, they are extremely humid, oftentimes even into October. Even for a muggy Midwest summer, it seemed very cool in there. Let's jump ahead to winter. The winters can be brutal here as well. We later found out that this place was beyond cold in the winter, no matter how many heaters we had going. In fact, I told Nate if we had some pet penguins, we'd have to get him sweaters. It was unbearable to walk on the kitchen floor during the winter. I absolutely had to wear socks at least to walk across that floor. And at one point, we had the furnace about as high as it would run, as well as an infrared floor heater and a kerosene heater just in the living room, and it was still pretty miserable. Anyway, upon moving in, I forgot how we chose rooms, but Nate took the huge second floor bedroom, and for some reason I took the third floor bedroom, which seemed a bit bigger than any of the other spaces. It was a little creepy, and for some reason upon my discovery of this podcast and my new love for listening to these true ghost stories, I was sort of liking creeping myself out at night a little bit. And to be dead honest, although the house was so big and so old, it didn't once cross my mind that this house could possibly have some energy left behind to discover. I was in for a wake-up call within about the first 2 weeks. I was laying upstairs in the evening, just relaxing, getting settled in, and I heard something coming from downstairs on one of the 3 floors, including the big and extremely horrifying basement below me. The sound which sounded to me like a mix between what would be an old squeaky water pipe and a female voice moaning. And it was very audible. In fact, I recall having goosebumps immediately. I ran downstairs and asked Nate, "What the fuck was that?" He was in the bathroom flossing, and he said, "What was what?" I said, "Tell me you didn't hear that. Come on." He said, "I didn't hear anything." Mind you, Nate is a very laid-back guy who doesn't get rattled easily. I think you could drive a frickin' sailboat into our living room and he would probably just say, "Damn, dude, I like the color of that boat. Now we just need some water." If I recall, I didn't invest too much in this old house. I think it was within a couple of days, and I wasn't thinking much about it at all. Okay, a little more about Nate. His job required him to leave town at very random times and days, and sometimes he'd be gone for 3 to 6 days at a time. I really never knew when he was going to be around or not. I had heard an episode of this paranormal show that I was into, where a guy was explaining that he had downloaded an app which made his phone act as an EVM meter. I quickly downloaded the app and got familiar with it, but most of the time I would turn the app on and just let it run. It would basically come up with words at random, and I thought it to be more of a novelty. I think I was secretly hoping that it would somehow show evidence that pointed to the contrary, and I was also sort of afraid of that at the same time. I came home on a Friday night and I sat down on the couch in this enormous living room and turned the EVM on. I got out a can of dip and sat it beside me. Almost immediately, in a creepy electronic male voice, my phone said the word couch and tobacco, one right after the other. I was immediately spooked. Within a few more minutes, I got out my pad of tracing paper and began working on a drawing for my Saturday tattoo appointment. And within 30 seconds, the app blurted out the word artist. Okay, this was getting a little too real too fast, and almost out of my frustration I yelled, "All right, if there's anyone else here, quit fucking around and make yourself known." Right then it sounded like someone in my kitchen was going through my cabinet with plates and bowls, so I went in to see if it was Nate. But there was nothing at all. Everything was completely normal. Right then, there was a sound from the living room, and it sounded like someone had lifted up my little TV and just let it fall back down. Nothing super loud, just as if my TV got shifted a little, as the type of table it was sitting on made an unmistakable sound. So upon walking back in there to check that out, and trying to get back to my drawing, I noticed nothing was out of place in there either. I sat back down, and it sounded like Nate literally fell out of bed in his room, as he was directly above the living room. I immediately texted him and said, "Hey bro, you alright? What's going on?" Within a few minutes, he texted back and said, "Yeah man, just driving back from Buffalo, New York." This is when I started looking through my contacts and inviting anyone close by to come and stay the night and keep me company. A ton of things were going through my head, like, okay, this just became really not fun, and what in the world did I get myself into with this place? It didn't completely sell me on the place being haunted necessarily, but I didn't feel like I was there by myself anymore. And the thought of listening to ghost stories with my headphones on sort of made my skin crawl. I didn't tell Nate just yet, nor did I explain this to anyone else, but I think I tried to tell a couple of friends that there was something weird going on at this new house. Very shortly after that, I had sort of regained my courage, and I was alone there again at night, and I turned the app on and began walking into my room. I asked out loud, "Is there anyone else here in this house?" Very quickly, that creepy tin can sounding voice said, "Isabel." And I looked around me 360 degrees and did a visual sweep of sorts to convince myself that if I can't see you, you aren't here. Which is dumb, I know. I felt like I wanted to talk to Kim, who managed the property. Because of her son being one of my clients, I sort of developed a friendship with her. So I gave her a ring the next day and said, "Hey, this may sound silly, but do you know the tenants who were here before us? Had anyone ever mentioned anything unusual or sort of creepy happening around here?" She instantly knew that I was serious about it, and I'm sure she could hear in the tone I had. She wasted no time to say, "Well, the lady who rented a couple years back said that there was an elderly woman who would randomly show up to the door saying, 'You're in my house. This is my house. You need to leave because it belongs to me.' Then she would leave and just periodically show back up and repeat what she had said before. This definitely got my attention. She then went on to say that she and her husband were at the house doing a walkthrough before we moved in, and her husband just at one moment said, 'You know what, I want to leave. I just feel like we're not the only ones here.' And of course that didn't sit well with me. And I explained to her all that I'd experienced so far, to which she didn't sound surprised. In fact, she seemed interested in the encounters I'd had. I'll cut to the point with the other events that occurred. I had a good childhood friend who was on his way out to Indianapolis from Delaware and wanted to stop and stay the night and recharge. I said, "Sure thing, come stay at this creepy-ass place with me." I can't remember if I'd mentioned to him the things going on, but he came and we decided to do a session of tattoo work on his arm and order pizza. We just had a good time relaxing and catching up on things. That night, I was sweeping out the fireplace and had my kitchen trash can in my living room. This trash can lid had a pivot where it was able to fully flip and spin, and at some point while we were eating, there was a loud bang in the foyer that was as if you had dropped a college-sized textbook from the ceiling to the floor. Obviously, this made us both stop chewing, and we just stared at each other and said, "What the fuck was that?" Just after that sound, out of the corner of our eyes, we saw the trash can lid do about 3 full rotations. and really that was enough for him to ask me what the hell was going on in this house. I sort of said, well, I'm glad you're here to witness this crap, and it's made me question my sanity. I don't recall much of the rest of the night, but I do recall us sleeping in the same huge room just because we sort of were freaked out. The next day, he did ask a little bit about the house and what had happened there, but I don't recall us talking too much about it. That incident was probably the most real to me, given that we both saw the trash can lid move without anyone touching it. The next thing that I recall happening was I had a girl staying the night with me, and I'd told her a bit about what I'd witnessed. She was definitely not thrilled if I had to leave the room in the middle of the night to get a drink of water from the kitchen, which is exactly how this incident started. It was after 2 a.m., and I went downstairs to get something to eat or drink, and this time, more than any other night, I felt like someone was watching me. I just got one of those shivers like you do when you take a leak. The very second I felt that, I heard the girl scream, and I heard her on her feet running down the hall. So I darted back up the stairs and asked her what the hell was going on, to which she said that she felt the mattress kick her off of the bed, as if there was someone on the other side of the mattress kicking underneath her. Of course, I stayed right by her, and for a while she would make me go anywhere in the house with her at night. While she was there, we were constantly running to the basement to reset the breakers. There was only one certain outlet on the second floor that you could have the space heater on and not trip the fuse. This place was way more of a pain in the ass to live in than it was worth, although it was sort of a cool conversation piece anytime someone asked about where I lived. There were a few other things that had my chest thumping when they happened, and I did experience the bed shaking a couple of times when I was in it, which really fucked with me. But the last super weird thing I'll mention is, one night I was actually trying to sleep in my daughter's room, which was down the hall from Nate. No one else was there that night, but about 4 feet past the foot of the bed, I could hear what sounded like two men having a conversation through the other side of the closet wall. We did have a bus stop directly across the street from the house, so I walked to the window to see if there were people at the bus stop, but in fact it was after midnight and the buses weren't running. The empty street under the street lamp did add a very creepy element to this as I stared out for a minute trying to figure out who or what it was I was hearing. The talking sounded muffled and I couldn't make out a word, but it was there and very real. After I laid back down in bed, I had my ears tuned in to see if anything was going to continue, and after a moment it sure did. It became annoying quickly, and I screamed at whoever or whatever it was to shut up and leave me be. And it stopped. That year and a half I lived at that house opened my mind and obviously made me a believer in the paranormal. Although thinking back, I always thought that I was going to see an actual ghost at some point. And part of me wishes I would have. However, anytime I'm listening to your show and I hear someone talk about shadow people, I get chills just hearing stories, and I can't imagine how I'd react had I seen something. I'd probably have flipped out. Since then, I haven't seen or heard anything you'd consider creepy compared to that time in that house. But the name Isabel, which my ghost app brought up multiple times, still appears in random situations, and I sometimes wondered if I'd done some research on the history of the place, the name Isabel might have turned up. But I think I was always too afraid to find out something like that. The Tack Room by Shavors. The house where I grew up was also the house my father grew up in. It was an old Victorian pile complete with brick stables and 2 paddocks at the back, and those would have originally been used for the carriage horses of the house, and during my father's childhood, the hunters and riding horses of the family. We had many things happening that all revolved around our horses and animals. One night, the photograph of my mother's horse Sandy flew off the sideboard for no reason at all. She put it back and carried on reading her book when it flew off again. She says she clearly heard a voice saying, "Go to Sandy." So she went out to the yard to find Sandy down in his stall, suffering the first signs of colic. Quite often when you were in the yard, the horses would look past you and whicker to something or someone you could not see, and sometimes you would look out the window and see all 3 horses standing by the paddock gate whickering and rubbing up against something. Our family dog could be seen sitting perfectly still, wagging his tail and offering his paw to no one. And you could always smell pipe smoke in the tack room, but no one in the family smoked. My father always used to say, "Looks like Danny's here again." Turns out, Danny was the young groom who used to work at the house, but was killed in World War II in 1940. My father remembered him as a lovely, gentle young man whom all the horses he was looking after adored, and he also used to smoke a pipe. Dad assumed that Danny had come back to look after our horses in the place that he loved. Over the years, many things happened, and it just became the norm to go to the stables in the morning and say, "Morning, Danny," and at the last thing, when the lights were out, "Night, Danny." None of our animals were in the slightest bit worried by it. Danny stayed around until we had the last horse we kept at the house put to sleep in 1993, my father's Hunter, who was age 28. Then he seemed to disappear. My mother sold the house in 2006 following my father's death to move into sheltered accommodations. Truth being stranger than fiction, I still have friends in that village and went back last year to visit. I met up with the new owners of the house in the pub and asked if all was well and did they love living there as much as we did. To be told, they loved it, but found it really odd that since they bought their daughter a pony, they kept smelling pipe tobacco in the room that we used to use as a tack room.
Hey gang, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed these creepy tales. Please like, share, and subscribe if you haven't already, and be sure to click on the notification icon to assure you're made aware of new episodes when they come out. Follow me on social media, all the links are in the description, and of course find me on Patreon. I'm revamping that site as I say this, and moving forward, for as little as $1 a month, you'll have access to content before it appears anywhere else, along with some other great perks. And why don't you get in on things? Send me your true scary story, unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. Until next time, be excellent to each other. And remember, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.